Our relationships change the course of our lives, but can they change history? I'm the Affair Archivist, and in this video, we'll be exploring the tumultuous and passionate life of Frida Kahlo. In 1922, Diego Rivera was commissioned to paint a mural at the National Preparatory School in Mexico City. As he would eventually find out, his future wife and fellow artist, Frida Kahlo, then 15 years old, was spying on him. She taunted and teased him and stole his lunch one day. Rivera was not amused by the teenager's antics, but little did he know she would one day become his wife, and together they would be the most iconic couple in art history. Frida considered Diego to be the love of her life, but their romance was tumultuous, mired by Rivera's constant cheating and her chronic health issues. Still, despite being the lesser-known artist when she married Rivera in 1929, Frida found a way to live with the emotional turmoil her husband caused her and escaped his shadow to become a lauded artist in her own right. She had many affairs of her own, which she strove to keep secret from the jealous Diego. These fraught emotions often inspired Frida's groundbreaking paintings and made her one of the most recognizable artists of all time. Frida Kahlo was born on July 6, 1907, though she would later claim she was born in 1910, the same year the Mexican Revolution broke out in Coyoacán. Her mother was Mexican, and her father was a German Jewish photographer who immigrated to Mexico in 1890. She was the third of four daughters and had two half-sisters from her father's previous marriage, which ended when his first wife died in childbirth. Both of her parents were sickly, and she was mainly raised by her older sisters. When the Mexican Revolution broke out, Frida's father, Guillermo, struggled with his photography business, and the family had to take in boarders and mortgage their home to stay afloat. Her father was not quite a family man. He preferred to be in his studio, working on his photos or paintings. Yet he and Frida were close, and he considered her to be the most intelligent of all of his children. She had a more difficult relationship with her mother, Mathilde, who was strict but also loving towards her. She was raised in a devout Catholic family, which emphasized the qualities of a good Mexican wife. However, from a young age it was clear that both religion and domesticity were not going to be priorities for Frida. Frida was afflicted with polio when she was 6 years old and was quarantined in her room for 6 months. She had an imaginary friend to cope with her isolation. One of her legs was always slightly smaller than the other, even after she recovered. She wore long skirts to deter bullies from making fun of her leg, which later became a part of her signature style. Unfortunately, this was the first of many health issues for Frida. As a teenager, she was sent away to school at Mexico City's preparatory school, where she first encountered Diego Rivera. When she admitted to her friends that she had a crush on the famous painter, they were shocked, telling her he was fat and ugly. How could she possibly like him? She responded, "Diego's so gentle, so tender, so wise, so sweet. I'd bathe him and clean him." Given that Diego was 36 years old at the time and already married to his second wife, and Frida was still a schoolgirl, it was a while before their love affair began. In the meantime, Frida dated her peer, Alejandro Gomez Arias. She was with Alejandro when the most fateful and tragic moment of her life occurred in September of 1925. The pair were on their way home from school when the bus they were on was struck by a streetcar. A metal bar impaled Frida near her waist, causing a series of catastrophic injuries. Her foot was broken, her pelvis crushed, her spine fractured. Her survival was hanging in the balance. She spent a month in the hospital and several more months bedbound at her home to recover. When it was discovered that Frida's spine was still not healed, she had to spend even more time in a plaster cast to reset her backbone. During these painful and isolating times, Frida turned to painting and created her first self-portrait, which was dedicated to Alejandro. Though the accident was devastating and negatively impacted the rest of her life, it was the catalyst to Frida's artistry. Beforehand, she planned to become a doctor. However, her injuries made this impossible. She took the accident in stride and began expressing herself through art. She reflected, "Since I was young, this misfortune did not at the time take on the character of a tragedy. I felt I had energies enough to do anything instead of studying to become a doctor. And without paying much attention, I began to paint. In March of 1927, Alejandro set off to Europe for several months. Frida waited with bated breath for his letters, which were becoming fewer and farther in between. She wrote to him, "Write to me a little more. Your letters really heal me." Unfortunately, when he returned that November, he broke up with Frida. Alejandro went on to become a lawyer, professor, and journalist, and kept in touch with her sporadically throughout the rest of her life. Despite these setbacks, Frida was not one to pity herself. The accident inspired her to adopt an outlook of tragic optimism paired with a dark sense of humor, which helped her cope with the complexities of her life and the pain of her condition. Frida decided not to return to the preparatoria school and instead focused on painting. She became involved with other artists in Mexico City and joined the Communist Party in 1929. This is what reunited her with Diego, who was also a communist. Rivera was Mexico's most famous artist and world-renowned for his art, particularly his murals. At the time, he was married to but separated from Lupe Marin, who he had 2 daughters with. Despite not being an attractive man, he had love affairs with many beautiful women. When he met Frida, he was having an affair with artist Tina Modotti. He agreed to look at Frida's paintings. He was impressed and took her under his wing. She visited his studio to watch him paint, and he visited her parents' house every Sunday. When they kissed for the first time, it was under a streetlight, and Rivera said, "On sudden impulse, I stooped to kiss her. As our lips touched, the light nearest us went off and came on again when our lips parted." He eventually recognized her as the mischievous schoolgirl at the preparatoria school he encountered many years before. Frida was a huge admirer of his work and his fame, and she looked at Diego as a mentor figure. However, he was careful not to become too involved in her artistic process. He wanted her to develop her own distinct talents, with limited influence from him. As their courtship intensified, he paid off the mortgage on her parents' home and helped support them. Both were suffering from ill health. On August 21st, 1929, Frida and Diego married. Only Frida's father was in attendance, as her family overall was not happy that she was marrying a fat communist. For some reason, Rivera's ex-wife, Lupe Marin, was invited to the wedding party. Frida invited her as a gesture of goodwill, which backfired. She acted normal in the beginning, but then lifted up Frida's skirt and shouted, "You see these 2 sticks? These are the legs Diego now has instead of mine." Rivera did not behave much better. He got extremely drunk, brandished a pistol, and broke a guest's finger. Frida left her wedding reception in tears and refused to see her new husband for days afterwards. She eventually forgave him, and they moved into a home together in Mexico City. Frida did not paint much in the beginning of their marriage. She was busy supporting Diego, who was coming under fire by other communists for accepting commissions from the Mexican government, which conflicted with his politics. Many in the party turned their back on him, and he became sick. Frida nursed him back to health. Lupe came over to teach her how to make Diego's favorite foods. To thank her, Frida painted her portrait and gifted it to her. When Diego was well enough to work again, she would bring him lunch in a basket with flowers, a Mexican tradition. He trusted her opinion on his work, and she became an advisor to him both in art and business. Unfortunately, though she loved children and desperately wanted to have a family, Frida could not carry a pregnancy to term. "We could not have a child, and I cried inconsolably, but I distracted myself by cooking, dusting the house, sometimes by painting, and every day going to accompany Diego on the scaffold. It gave him great pleasure when I arrived with the midday meal in a basket covered with flowers." At one point, she was pregnant for 3 months, but had to have an abortion after it was discovered that the fetus was in the wrong position. Due to her injuries in the bus accident years before, she could not give birth without major complications, though a doctor assured her she could have a child through a cesarean section. Her struggle to have a child would inspire some of her greatest works of art. In 1930, Frida discovered that Diego was having an affair with his assistant, Ione Robinson. She said, I've suffered 2 grave accidents in my life, one in which a streetcar knocked me down. The other accident is Diego. Diego was a notorious womanizer who seemed incapable of being in a monogamous relationship, but Frida eventually learned to laugh off his affairs and get on with her life, on the outside. She said she cannot love him for what he is not. To Rivera's credit, he encouraged Frida to have her own life outside of his, to work on her art, and have her own friends. In the end, his art would always take precedence over Frida or any other woman in his life. He does not have friends, he has allies. He's very affectionate, but he never surrenders himself, Frida wrote of her husband. In the autumn of 1930, Frida accompanied Diego on an extended trip to America when he was commissioned to paint several murals by wealthy American industrialists, who were up in arms when they realized that Rivera was creating art that protested the systems that made them incredibly rich and powerful. Despite the controversy with his murals, he had a successful exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. While there, Frida met artist Georgia O'Keeffe, who some speculate she had an affair with, though this is not verified. Diego claimed that the women flirted at the exhibition. Georgia and Frida had a lot in common despite their 20-year age difference. O'Keeffe had also married an older man more famous in the art world than her at the time of their marriage, who she eventually eclipsed. Frida was taken with O'Keeffe and wrote to her, "I thought of you a lot and never forget your wonderful hands and the color of your eyes." It seems they never had a physical relationship, as Frida wrote in a letter that she and O'Keeffe could not make love because of the latter artist's health issues. Diego and Frida traveled to Detroit for his work. There, Frida discovered she was pregnant again and struggled with the decision to keep the child or not. An American doctor also told her she could deliver the child through C-section, and she decided not to terminate the pregnancy, even though Diego did not want any more children. She stopped painting and mostly stayed in their apartment. Unfortunately, on July 4th, 1932, she lost the baby about 3 months into the pregnancy. She was hospitalized for 13 days and began sketching again as she recovered. She was devastated, but realized she was lucky that she had survived the miscarriage, which put her life in danger. After leaving the hospital, she truly began to come into her own as an artist. It seemed that the many tragedies she endured throughout her life fueled her creativity, and that perhaps her artistic expression was the main thing that helped her cope. Her painting, Henry Ford Hospital, signaled this shift in style and broke new ground in the art world as it depicted her harrowing miscarriage. Diego wrote in his autobiography, "Frida began to work on a series of masterpieces which had no precedent in the history of art, paintings which exalted the feminine qualities of endurance of truth, reality, cruelty, and suffering. Never before had a woman put such agonized poetry on canvas as Frida did at this time in Detroit. She wanted to try again, but Diego refused, given the strain another pregnancy would put on her health and his own desire not to have more children. She instead became close with his children from previous marriages and her nieces and nephews. She also became more consistent and committed to her painting. The couple returned to Mexico from the U.S. in 1933 and moved into a home in San Angel that was actually 2 separate homes connected by a bridge. Like her childhood home, Frida lived in the blue part of the house, while Diego lived in the pink section. They both had studios in their parts of the house. In the summer of 1934, Frida was betrayed by Diego yet again, and this time she could not easily laugh it off. She found out he was having an affair with her sister, Christina. Christina's husband had left her in 1930, and she struggled to raise her children on her own. It is likely the affair began around this time, but the start and end date of it is unknown. Christina was a muse to Diego, who painted her in a few murals, highlighting her beauty and femininity. In one mural, she is depicted nude, holding a vagina-shaped flower in her hand. Typically, when Diego painted Frida in his murals, she was depicted as a political activist and revolutionary, as opposed to a symbol of beauty or sensuality. To get her revenge, Frida cut all of her hair off, as Diego loved her long hair, and stopped wearing her signature Tijuana costumes for a time in protest of his behavior. She painted a few small nips, which depicted the real-life stabbing of a woman by her lover, a tragedy she read about in the newspaper and used as a metaphor for her own feelings of betrayal and heartbreak. It is unclear when Diego's affair with Christina ended. He later admitted, "If I loved a woman, the more I loved her, the more I wanted to hurt her." Frida was only the most obvious victim of this disgusting trait. Frida moved out of their home and into an apartment, taking her beloved spider monkey with her. One day, she looked out her window and saw her sister at a gas station across the street from her apartment. "Why does she come here and fill up her car in front of my house?" she yelled. Frida decided to stay with Diego, but intended to live life independently from him. She realized she would never love another person the way she loved him, despite all of the pain he put her through. "All the rages I have gone through have served only to make me understand in the end that I love you more than my own skin, and that though you may not love me in the same way, still you love me somewhat. Isn't that so? I shall always hope that that continues. With that I am content." She once again resolved to laugh off his affairs, but she would continue to struggle with Diego's lack of fidelity for years to come. In an effort to establish herself as an artist, Frida traveled to New York in 1935. While she was away, an attempt was made on Diego's life as he sat working in his studio. Assassins shot at Christina, who was working as his secretary, as she sat in the same chair Frida was often in when she visited his studio. Diego believed Frida may have been the intended target of the assassination, not him. Afterward, it occurred to me that the would-be assassins had thought that by killing Frida, they could hurt me infinitely more than if they struck at me. In this respect, they were absolutely right. The assassination attempt was likely planned by Nazi Germany, who wanted to hurt Rivera due to his communist and anti-fascist views. When Frida returned to Mexico, she eventually reconciled with both Diego and Christina, though some wounds never completely healed. They struggled financially, and Frida was responsible for handling their finances, as Diego could not be bothered with the business side of his career, often leaving checks for hefty sums of money uncashed for extended periods of time. When she became angry with him, she retreated to her side of their home and locked the door. This forced him to go downstairs and through the yard to knock on the door and wait for a servant to let him in. Given his size, this left him out of breath. To deal with her physical and emotional struggles, Frida turned to alcohol. "I drank because I wanted to drown my sorrows, but now the damned things have learned to swim, and now decency and good behavior weary me." Frida began having her own extramarital affairs with both men and women. She had been attracted to girls since her time at the National Preparatory School, but as she and Diego became more involved in the art world, she had more opportunities to experiment with her sexuality, both physically and artistically. Her paintings, Two Nudes in a Forest and What the Water Gave Me, explored sapphic themes. She gave the former painting to actress Dolores Del Rio, who she is rumored to have had an affair with, though this is not conclusively proven. Diego was fine with her having same-sex affairs and encouraged her to have relationships with women. Some believe this was not because he was open-minded. He wanted to distract Frida from his own affairs. Additionally, Frida believed it was highly unlikely he would be as understanding had he caught her in bed with a man. He was so jealous, she thought it was possible he would kill any male lover he caught her with. She always locked the bedroom door when she was with the opposite sex. One of these men was Isamu Noguchi, a Japanese-American sculptor who admitted to having assignations here and there with Frida at her sister's home. He believed it was only fair that Frida have relationships outside of her marriage, given her husband's notorious philandering. They fell in love and planned to get an apartment together. These plans came to an abrupt end when the bill for the furniture they purchased for their home was sent to Diego. It is believed that Rivera confronted Frida and Noguchi at her parents' home in Coyoacan, where he found them in bed together. To escape his wrath, Noguchi climbed an orange tree and hid on the roof. His sock fell off as he ran for his life, and Diego, who was armed, found it. Luckily, Noguchi escaped unharmed, but when he later visited Frida in the hospital and ran into Diego, Diego told him, "Next time I see you, I'm going to shoot you." One of Frida's most famous and unlikely affairs was with communist leader Leon Trotsky. After losing his bid for power in the Soviet Union to Joseph Stalin, Trotsky was forced into exile and lived under the constant threat of assassination. He and his wife lived in Norway in the mid-1930s, but were eventually forced to leave. He then sought asylum in Mexico, which Rivera helped him obtain by starting a petition and appealing to the Mexican government. He was allowed to move to Mexico as long as he did not interfere with the nation's politics and government. When he arrived on January 9, 1937, he and his wife Natalia were afraid to get off the ship. However, when several prominent Mexican communists came to receive them, including Frida, they disembarked. Diego was in the hospital at the time and was upset he could not welcome Trotsky. Frida arranged for the Trotskys to live at her childhood home, the Blue House in Coyoacan, where they would stay for 2 years rent-free. Frida was his translator, as he did not speak Spanish, but they both spoke English. Before he took an interest in Frida, Trotsky tried to seduce Christina in a bizarre way, planning a fire drill as an excuse to climb over the wall of her home to see her. However, he and Frida soon began flirting in English right in front of his wife. While she did not understand the actual language, she read between the lines and became angry and depressed. Trotsky hid love letters inside the pages of books he recommended to Frida, and her departing salutation to him was, "All of my love." Frida and Trotsky had sex at Christina's house numerous times. Diego remained unaware of their affair for its duration, and Frida likely got a thrill out of betting one of his revolutionary heroes, knowing how angry it would have made him. The Trotsky affair did not last long, however. She informed him she was going away to Veracruz, and after she left, he wrote her a 9-page letter begging her to return to him, that he loved her and that she meant so much to him. Though he was in his 60s, he was acting like a teenager. Frida was flattered by the letter, but asked her friend to tear it up, stating, "I am very tired of the old man." The age difference, as well as the risk she was taking, likely put her off of Trotsky. It is odd that Trotsky came to Mexico to escape death, but then proceeded to cuckold the man who secured his asylum. Frida gave him a parting gift on his birthday that November, a self-portrait with an inscription that read, "For Leon Trotsky, with all love I dedicate this painting on the 7th of November, 1937. Frida Kahlo in San Angel, Mexico." The end of the Trotsky affair marked the beginning of one of the most prolific periods in Frida's artistic career. She had her first exhibition in New York City, which a Hungarian photographer named Nicholas Murray helped organize. They had met the previous year in 1937 through mutual friends and began a love affair. Frida called him Flower in the Aztec language and wrote to him, "I adore you, my love, believe me, like I never loved anyone. Only Diego will be in my heart as close as you. Always." Their affair lasted a few months while Frida was in New York, but she was missing Diego and yearned to go home. Murray wanted to be with Frida, but she made it clear that Diego was her true love. He took another lover and eventually married, which hurt Frida. It is believed that he could not deal with her injuries, which may have prevented her from having a normal sex life. He was sorry that he hurt her and insisted he still loved her. They continued to be friends up until her death. In the summer of 1939, Diego and Frida separated and filed for divorce. By the end of the year, their marriage was over. It is unknown why exactly they parted at this moment in time, but it seems the end of the marriage was initiated and insisted upon by Diego. Some believe he may have learned of Frida's affair with Murray and/or Trotsky, or that Frida could not fulfill his sexual needs. He may have still had a relationship with his second wife, Lupe Marin, who said, "When Frida was good for nothing anymore, he came singing at my windows." Their friends believed Diego would marry his Hungarian assistant, Irene Boas, but nothing came of this, and Irene and Frida became friends. Diego claimed it was to help Frida legally, but never quite specified how the divorce legally benefited her. "There is no change in the magnificent relationship between us. We are doing it in order to improve Frida's legal position. Purely a matter of legal convenience in the spirit of modern times." He told one reporter that since she had achieved success on her own and was still young and beautiful, she no longer needed him. Frida simply told the journalist, "We were not getting along well," and was resolved never to marry again. She moved out of the house in Saint Angel, but they still saw each other and worked together after their marriage ended. In his autobiography, published after his death in 1960, Diego was more forthcoming about the reasons for their split. "I never was a faithful husband, even with Frida. As with his first and second wives, Angelina and Lupe, I indulged my caprices and had affairs. Now, moved by the extremity of Frida's condition, I began taking stock of myself as a marriage partner. I found very little which could be said in my favor. And yet I knew that I could not change. What she could not understand was that my choosing women who were either unworthy of me or inferior to her. She took it as a personal humiliation to be abandoned for sluts. During the 2 years we lived apart, Frida turned out some of her best work, sublimating her anguish into painting. Just as the divorce was finalized in December 1939, Frida finished her painting, Two Fridas, which is considered by many art critics her magnum opus. According to art historian McKinley Helm, who was with her when she received the papers that officially dissolved the marriage, the two Fridas are representative of the Frida that Diego loved, the second Frida, the woman whom Diego no longer loves. There the artery is ruptured. The Frida scorned tries to stay the flow of blood momentarily with a pair of surgeon's forceps. When the divorce papers arrived, while we were looking at the picture, I half expected her to seize the dripping instrument and fling it across the room. In her hands is a portrait of Diego as a child. Some have also interpreted the meaning of the cut umbilical cord as the loss of her unborn children and her husband. The painting also represents her Mexican and European heritage, as one Frida wears traditional Mexican clothing, while the other wears Victorian apparel. Soon after the divorce was finalized, Frida once again cut her hair off as an act of defiance. Frida suffered several health setbacks in the aftermath of the divorce. Her fingers became infected, which prevented her from painting. Her spine was causing her pain, and she was confined to a corset meant to correct it, but also prevented her from moving. This caused her to fall into a depression, and she used alcohol as a salve. She refused to take any money from Diego and tried to support herself through the sale of her work, but her health issues prevented her from producing more paintings. Her friends helped support her to spare her the indignity of having to ask Diego. In August of 1940, Leon Trotsky was assassinated in Coyoacán. Frida was devastated, and both she and Diego were suspects. Their home was searched, and Frida was questioned by the authorities. When she was released, she was again struggling with her health, and Diego pleaded with her to come to San Francisco. He believed American doctors would be able to help her more than those in Mexico. The doctors found that she had a kidney infection, advised her to stop drinking, and told her to rest. She began having an affair with Heinz Berggruen, a German refugee who was 25 years old, while Frida was about 33. He later became a renowned art dealer. It seems Diego may have orchestrated the affair, according to Berggruen. He knew what would happen. Perhaps he even wanted it to happen. There was something diabolical in him. He led me on. He took me by the hand. Berggruen was taken with Frida's beauty and visited her every day in the hospital for a month. They were not allowed to lock the doors of the hospital room to do it, but this seemed to add to the danger and attraction of the affair. After Frida was released, they went to New York together and lived at the Plaza Hotel for 2 months. They partied, but the honeymoon phase ended quickly, and they began fighting. Frida was a tempestuous woman. I was impressionable and immature. It seems that their age difference, and the fact that Heinz was not Diego, ultimately proved too much to overcome. She needed a male protector, and given his age and inexperience, he was not ready to take on that role. Heinz reflected. Her relationship with Diego was extremely difficult. Things didn't click anymore. She was deeply unhappy with him. On the other hand, she felt she needed someone strong to lean on. He was a heavy man physically. In a way, he was a huge animal, and she was so fragile, both physically and mentally. He gave her something solid to lean on. Diego reproposed to Frida on numerous occasions. He was motivated to remarry Frida when her doctor told him that her health was suffering as a result of their divorce, and that if they remarried, perhaps her condition would improve. It was not until her affair ended with Hines that she agreed to get remarried. Frida went back to San Francisco in November of 1940 and set her terms for the marriage. She wanted to be financially independent, though Diego would pay for half of her living expenses, and they would not have sex. The second stipulation was set in place because Frida could not stop thinking about the other women he had been intimate with while they made love, which caused her a great deal of emotional distress. Diego agreed to her terms, and they remarried on December 8, 1940, which was also his 54th birthday. After returning to Mexico, Diego and Frida settled back into married life. In a letter to her doctor, she wrote, "The remarriage functions well. A small quantity of quarrels, better mutual understanding on my part, fewer investigations of the tedious kind, with respect to other women. Thus you can understand that, at least, I have learned that life is this way, and the rest is painted bread." In their remarriage, they lived independent lives and continued having affairs. However, Frida still concealed her relationships with men to prevent Diego from flying into a jealous rage. Frida accepted Diego for his flaws. Perhaps they hoped to hear from me lament about how much one suffers living with a man like Diego, but I do not believe that the banks of a river suffer for letting the water run, or that the earth suffers because it rains, or the atom suffers discharging its energy. For me, everything has a natural compensation. With my difficult and obscure role of ally of an extraordinary being, I have the same reward as a green dot within a quantity of red. I have the reward of equilibrium. The truth, however, was more complicated. Activist and friend Ella Wolf claimed. When I was alone with her, she would tell me how sad her life was with Diego. She never got used to his lovers. Each time the wound was new, and she kept suffering till the day she died. Diego never cared. He said having sex was like urinating. He couldn't understand why people take it so seriously. But he was jealous of Frida, a double standard, el gran macho. Though her career was booming in the 1940s, Frida was still struggling to stay afloat financially, as was Diego. As a result, she began teaching art. Her students loved her unorthodox, creative, and laid-back approach to teaching. She took them outside to observe nature and paint. Unfortunately, her health prevented her from teaching full-time, and she was once again confined to an apparatus aimed at correcting her spine. She was also diagnosed with syphilis, though it is unclear if she actually had this affliction. In 1945, she had major spinal surgery in an effort to correct her spine. Unfortunately, it made things worse. Doctors botched the procedure, as the metal plate they put on her spine to fuse her vertebrae back together was put in the wrong place. She was given morphine as a painkiller in the hospital and became addicted. She had an affair with Catalan painter Joseph Bartoli, who was imprisoned in a concentration camp after fighting in the Spanish Civil War and escaped to Mexico. The affair is believed to have lasted about 3 years and was intense. Frida wrote to Bartoli, "The atoms of my body are yours and they vibrate together to love us. I want to live and be strong to love you with all the tenderness that you deserve, to give everything that is good in me, and to make you feel that you are not alone." However, as her health worsened, Frida had more affairs with women, oftentimes the same women Diego was sleeping with, as her ability to be physically intimate was limited. Frida even admitted at one point that she was attracted to Diego because he had breasts. Of his chest, it must be said that if he had disembarked on the island governed by Sappho, he would not have been executed by the female warriors. The sensitivity of his marvelous breasts would have made him admissible. Even so, his virility, specific and strange, makes him desirable also in the dominions of empresses avid for masculine love. Diego was rumored to be contemplating leaving the marriage again when he had an affair with Maria Felix, an actress and one of his muses. He was in love with her and believed that he was bad for Frida's health. Frida once again acted as though she didn't care, and may have been intimate with Maria as well. When a journalist asked if he was going to divorce Frida for Maria, he told them that the two women were together as they were speaking. Once again only being candid in his posthumously published autobiography, Diego admitted that he only went back to Frida when Maria turned down his marriage proposal. Although Frida was angry and hurt, she pushed the betrayal out of her mind. Yet another spinal surgery in 1946 was the beginning of the end for Frida. Her life was in a downward spiral, and Diego was mostly there for her until the end. When she was hospitalized for a year, Diego got a small room next to hers and stayed overnight. He read her poetry at her bedside, held her in his arms, and danced at her bedside. However, he was only sporadically devoted to her. Often he would disappear for periods of time, and some believed Frida stayed in the hospital for so long because he wanted to be free to work and carry on his affairs while his wife was not home. Frida's mood was dependent on his presence. When he was there, her spirits were lifted, and when he stayed away, she was depressed. When she returned home, she was bedridden, but still continued painting and sketching. In the early 1950s, she shifted to still life paintings, which perhaps reflected the stagnant nature of her life at this point. Diego encouraged her to court her female visitors. She came on to some of them, but was often rejected. One of the women, Raquel Tibol, who was also Diego's mistress, rejected Frida, leading her to attempt to take her own life. A nurse intervened and saved her. In an oddly tragic twist, the sister of one of Frida's patrons was in love with her and made a pass at her. When Frida rejected her, she said, "If you don't pay attention to me, I'll kill myself." This didn't change Frida's mind. The girl got poison, drank it, and died at the foot of Frida's bed. It is believed that the woman suffered from brain damage, which may have caused her to take such an extreme measure. Diego found the situation funny, laughing as he arranged to have her body removed. He made sure the press did not report this sad story. An exhibition of Frida's work was scheduled at the Galleria Arte Contemporaneo for the spring of 1953. The organizers were aware that Frida would not be alive much longer and wanted to celebrate her groundbreaking body of work while she was still alive. This gave her a huge boost in morale, and she was determined to attend the opening night, no matter how bad her health was. When the time finally came, Frida arrived on a stretcher, and a bed was placed in the middle of the gallery for her to lay in. The exhibition was well received, but the press reported that Frida looked very ill. That August, due to gangrene, Frida's right leg was amputated. This hurt her pride tremendously, and she refused visitors because she was ashamed to be seen in such a poor state of health. When Diego did visit, she was cold and barely spoke to him. Diego wrote, "Following the loss of her leg, Frida became deeply depressed. She no longer even wanted to hear me tell her of my love affairs, which she had enjoyed hearing about after our remarriage. She had lost her will to live." Frida did not want to leave the hospital after the amputation. It is believed that one of Diego's lovers, Emma Hurtado, had taken over the household in her absence, and Frida did not want to be subjected to being bossed around by one of the women her husband was cheating on her with. Hurtado was an art dealer and became Diego's fourth wife in 1955 after Frida's passing. Frida tried to take her own life in the hospital by overdosing, but she survived. When she was discharged, she went back to her childhood home in Coyoacán. Diego paid her medical expenses and did visit her, especially when she was in the depths of her depression. She eventually came around to dealing with the loss of her leg with the same fatalistic sense of humor that had gotten her through so many tragedies and setbacks before, and joked about it with her friends. She accepted that her time was coming, writing in her diary that death was nothing but a process in order to exist. In the summer of 1954, it seemed her health was taking a turn for the better, and she spoke of plans to adopt a child and visit Russia. However, after recovering from pneumonia, Frida was advised by her doctors to rest. Instead, she attended a communist rally. As she took ill once again, she took a bath, which was also against doctors' orders. Her death spiral progressed from there. Frida Kahlo died on July 13, 1954, at the age of 47. The official cause of death was said to be a pulmonary embolism, though some speculate that she committed suicide through a drug overdose. Diego believed that pneumonia ultimately ended her life. He was devastated by her death and in denial, so much so that the doctor cut Frida's veins open and showed Diego that she was not bleeding, proving she had passed on. Diego reflected. When I went into her room to look at her, her face was tranquil and seemed more beautiful than ever. The night before, she had given me a ring she had bought for me for our 25th anniversary, still 17 days away. I asked her why she was presenting it so early, and she replied, "Because I feel I am going to leave you very soon." Frida's pain fueled her art, but ultimately destroyed her. The accident she endured at a young age forever changed the trajectory of her life. She was determined to live to the fullest, but was often thwarted from doing so by her injuries. Her relationship with Diego, which should have been a sanctuary for her, only caused her more anguish. Yet the most painful part of all is that she could not seem to live without him. In retrospect, Diego regretted his behavior. Too late now, I realized that the most wonderful part of my life had been my love for Frida. In Frida's final words and wishes, we see her defiance and her desire to be free of the physical burdens life thrusted upon her. She requested to be cremated rather than buried. So much of her life was spent lying in sickbeds that she refused to be confined to a coffin for eternity. The last words in her diary read, "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope to never come back. Frida." Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe, and join me next time as we explore another affair from history.